En 1900, paraît dans The Speaker une série d'articles qui constituent un événement. L'auteur, visiblement très bien informé, avance des faits, des certitudes, pas des insinuations. Le coup est très bien joué parce que les articles sont anonymes, ce qui suscite une curiosité générale. Qui est l'auteur? Que veut-il? L'auteur de ces articles, c'est Edmund Dean Morel.
Edmund Dean Morel is one of history's most underestimated heroes. He rose from being a shipping clerk to Leopold's foremost adversary. He didn't have Leopold's royal pedigree, but in everything else, Morel was more than a match for the king. A Liverpool shipping line handled Leopold's rubber cargoes, and Morel got his first job there. But he soon became a leading journalist on West African affairs.
Because he's working in the West African trade, he specialises in West African news. So he's somebody who becomes a specialist and expert in West and Central African affairs. And when he becomes chief clerk to the Congo business, he's somebody who does a lot of to and froing between Antwerp and Liverpool, because Antwerp is where a great deal of the Congo trade is unloaded.
At Antwerp docks, Morel started unravelling the truth about Leopold's Congo. He described it as stumbling upon a secret society of murderers.
Morel est un expert du commerce colonial. Il est le premier à travailler sur les documents officiels de l'État indépendant du Congo et à faire parler ses propres statistiques. Avec lui, la protestation morale contre Léopold II cède la place à l'analyse du système et une analyse implacable. Puisque l'argent n'entre pas au Congo comme investissement ou comme salaire, une seule chose peut expliquer les quantités de caoutchouc et d'ivoire qui augmentent. Cette chose, le cœur du système léopoldien, c'est le travail forcé.
Morel had produced the first incontrovertible evidence of Leopold's crimes. He had proved that although vast amounts of rubber were landing at Antwerp, the king, instead of sending out goods to pay for the rubber, was shipping mainly guns and ammunition.
I have stood on that quay at Antwerp and seen the rubber disgorged from the bowels of the incoming steamer. And to my fancy there has mingled with the musical chimes of the old cathedral tower another sound. A sigh breathed in the gloomy equatorial forest by those from whose anguish this wealth was wrung.
Morel's book Red Rubber was described as the most appalling indictment of tyrannical atrocity ever recorded against any one man in any country or any age.
The Leopoldian conception of humanity is the humanity of the human tiger thirsting not for blood, but for rubber.
Morel was just 27 years old, half French and completely self-taught. He was also unstoppable. He moved to Harden in Wales, left his job at the shipping line and began a personal campaign against the king. In 6 months, he sent out 15,000 brochures and 3,700 letters. Within a year, Morel had his own newspaper, the West African Mail. Now he could get his message to an even wider audience. From his offices in Liverpool, Morel gathered together all the stories he could about the events in the Congo, and he set about trying to enlist the missionaries' help. But since the first wave of outbursts against Leopold, the missionaries had gone silent.
They had the evidence, they had the details, they had the stories that were going to grab popular imagination and that were going to make the campaign take off. But selfishly, the missionary societies didn't want these stories circulated because they didn't want to offend Leopold. They felt if they were critical at all, they would be thrown out, and that meant that they wouldn't achieve their ultimate end, which was the maximum conversion of African souls. I think they had a rather mechanistic view of what they were doing, and one soul converted was one step nearer nearer the second coming, if you like. And if those converted souls were subsequently mutilated or murdered, well, so be it. They died Christians, so what?
Step by step, Morel persuaded the missionaries to come forward with articles for his West African mail. One of the first was Charles Banks, one of the missionaries from Bolengi.
We heard a report that the state soldiers had attacked the village of Bandaka-Wajiko because the rubber was not of the best quality. In a little shed lay one of my late school children, a promising young lad. I lifted the leaves by which he was covered and saw that his right hand had been cut off. I then went through the village and saw the people burying their dead. I counted over 20 bodies and newly filled graves. All the bodies had the right hand cut off.
Morel recherche l'efficacité. Pour réussir, il a besoin de tout le monde, de toutes les forces morales, spirituelles, matérielles. Alors, peu importe ses propres convictions religieuses, il a besoin des missionnaires, il les gagne à sa cause. Peu importe ses idées sociales, il a besoin des hommes d'affaires, il les rallie à lui. En réunissant tout ce monde autour de lui, il se révèle un très habile tacticien politique.
7,000 miles away, Morel now had a new ally. A stream of letters arrived at the Foreign Office in London. The British government had appointed a consul to Leopold's Congo Free State, and the new consul was outraged.
Captain van Kerkhoven told me that he used to pay his native soldiers 5 brass rods per human head they brought him in during the course of any military operations.
The consul was Roger Casement, a man with 20 years of African experience.
Casement is a hugely romantic figure. He's somebody rather like Lawrence of Arabia. He's someone who I think one could say was probably a generation or a generation and a half ahead of his time in terms of his attitude towards the Africans. He said himself that he loved the Africans. He liked them. He liked their company. He wanted them to be friends. They liked him. He was someone who treated Africans with much more gentility, with much more consideration than was usual for the time.
In 1903, Casement spent 2 months travelling into the Upper Congo. Morel's campaign had pressured the British government into conducting an official investigation. Wherever Casement went, he talked to Africans and recorded their testimony.
Mondele azalaki koloba na basoda baye. Bozali koboma kaka basi kasi mibali te. Bolakisa te bozali koboma pe mibali. Tango bazalaki kobete biso masasi, bazalaki kokata nzoto ya biso mibali po ya komemele mondele. Ongambo ya ye bazalaki koloba ya solo bobomi mibali.
Casement realized, as had Morel, that the missionaries were the key witnesses, and he wanted to persuade them to go public with what they knew. He visited the town of Ikoko on Lake Tumba, where the missionary Joseph Clark lived.
Mokonto sepene to okuta na mboka ya Ikoko. Topesi mbote wemba biso na kati mboka malamu toko tungisa bino mingi te tozaka koleka toza bapaya.
Na sepeli mingi na makambo yo zali koyebisa ngai.